In 2013, Zombabe and her friends decided to make a Ouija board. Her best friend lives about a 45-minute drive from the closest store and nearest town, so there wasn't much to do. They'd spent the day watching movies but eventually got bored, so the user, her friend, the friend's boyfriend, and his friend decided to make the board. About a week before they made the board, the two friends had been staying alone at the house when the Reddit writer woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway nearing the bedroom. She tried to wake her friend, but it was no use. She was a heavy sleeper. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The writer waited, holding her breath, for the door to open, but it never did. The next few hours she spent awake, waiting for something to happen. When both girls were finally awake by 11 that morning, before either left the room, she told her friend what had happened the night before. And what her friend said in response chilled her to the bone. She said that for years she'd been hearing the same footsteps and that they had always stopped right outside her bedroom. No one else had heard the footsteps until the writer. That night, they made their Ouija board. The group were messing around with it, not getting any real responses when they suddenly heard a loud bang in the back on the house. They decided to stop for the night. The friend left to drive the other two home, leaving the Reddit user alone at the house. Being alone after hearing the loud noise and the footsteps made her nervous, so she turned on the television for a distraction while she waited for her friend to return. In the middle of the opening credits, the television froze and started making loud buzzing noises. She tried to turn off the TV, but the remote wouldn't work. Then she tried unplugging it, but it kept going. Thoroughly freaked out, she went outside to wait for her friend to get back. At this point, she had started shaking and crying and texted her friend explaining what had happened. Then the dog started barking at the living room door, viciously growling and snarling like they saw something no human could. 30 minutes later, her friend finally arrived back home. Both girls could hear the television from the porch, but when they went inside, it had completely shut off and was still unplugged. Neither are sure exactly what happened, but they're certain it was some kind of malevolent spirit. Last year, Small Bean Dean went to a friend's house for a party. Around 1 in the morning, the group decided to use a Ouija board. The Reddit user was the only one who believed in accounts of the paranormal, so she was hesitant when her friends brought out the board. But instead of giving her friends more reasons to tease her when it came to the paranormal, she acted as if she didn't believe in such activity. They began asking the board questions. They started with a few normal questions and nothing really exciting happened. Then someone asked if the spirit wanted to hurt them, and it responded with only one. The group started to get creeped out at this point, and rightfully so. When one friend asked the natural follow-up question, who, the board spelled out Natasha, the Reddit user's full name. It should be noted that she doesn't care for their full name and has everyone call her Tasha instead. Tasha then left the room while her friends continued playing, but found out later that night that the group forgot to say goodbye to the board. Anyone familiar with a Ouija board knows that closing the interaction with the spirit is crucial before stopping use of the board. Needless to say, she was nervous. After this, Tasha has no memory of the night. She only remembers getting a migraine and nosebleeds. Her friends took videos of her acting strangely, speaking with a changed voice, and a few instances of her talking in other languages. However, that night wasn't the only time this happened. In the days following, Tasha's parents reported the same things happening. Once again, she remembered nothing but migraines and nosebleeds. About 2 weeks later, she was back to normal. Or so she thought. Tasha was suddenly hospitalized for an excruciating pain in her kidney, so bad that it almost shut down. The doctors tried everything but couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then, on the day she was scheduled for surgery, the pain suddenly stopped. 1 day later, Tasha was released. Since that incident, she has never felt like she was truly alone. Sometimes she feels someone grabbing her hands or neck, making it difficult to breathe. Tasha has always believed in the paranormal, but this experience made it far more real for her. A few years ago, Tom had just been through a rough divorce from their high school sweetheart. Their best friend had taken to distracting them by taking long road trips. One morning, they were on their way to Carlsbad, New Mexico, when they paused alongside a river dam. They were drinking cider and snacking when the pair decided to explore the dried riverbed. It was obvious that they weren't the first ones to go trekking through the riverbed. The pair could see human, canine, and feline footprints in the mud. They then recall starting to feel an odd sensation, like they were being watched. Their friend caught the writer's attention and called them over. There was a bone in the ground, what they now believe was a spinal cord. At first they thought it was a beef or pork bone on some kind. They continued looking around the riverbed when they found a strange rust-colored rock sticking out from the sand. When they got closer, they realized it was a half-buried little girl's shoe. The Reddit user stepped back and ran forward, preparing to kick the shoe. Suddenly, they heard a little girl's voice shout, "No, don't, please!" They looked around, but didn't see anyone besides themselves and their friend. The friend asked why they stopped, and they replied, "Didn't you hear that, little girl?" Both confused, they decided to shrug it off and continued on their way. Meanwhile, the feeling that someone was watching them grew stronger. A few minutes later, they spotted another bone. Now they began to get scared. The bone was clearly human. The friend called the non-emergency police number for Carlsbad, and they reported what they saw. 1 week later, they received a call from their friend that the Carlsbad police had called to report the bones they found were indeed human. During the investigation, the two were questioned and eventually informed that the rust-colored rock actually wasn't a rock at all, but the shell of a pickup truck that had disappeared along with the family of 3 it had been carrying